I was sitting in my rented apartment, looking around at my few belongings scattered around the room: a small bookshelf with my collection of cookbooks, a used coffee table that I found in a thrift store, a houseplant that a colleague gave me for a housewarming party. There wasn't much to show for 24 years of life, but when I accepted it all with a smile on my face, I felt free and understood how I got here. Although you will have to go back to the past, to the moment when I was only 7 years old and everything changed. I remember the day Mom and Dad brought Emma and Ethan home. I was so happy to become an older sister that I couldn't even sit still, jumping up and down with impatience while my mother carefully put the babies in their beds. Dad put a heavy hand on my shoulder and said with a warm smile, "You're all grown up now, Carolyn. These two will need the help of an older sister to take care of them." I proudly puffed out my chest and nodded impatiently, feeling the joy of realizing my own importance unfold inside. At that time, I still didn't know what those words really meant. At first it all seemed like a game. I loved bringing my mom diapers while she held the moody Ethan in her arms. I loved helping her set the table while she fed Emma. I even liked to clean up toys scattered on the floor when my parents asked me to help. "Carolyn, be a good girl and get the dust off the coffee table," Mom said, bouncing Ethan on her hip. "Carolyn, can you put these clothes away?" my dad asked, trying to rock Emma to sleep. But as I grew up, my responsibilities multiplied tenfold. When I turned 9, I could handle the twins safely while Mom and Dad ran errands. "Look after your brother and sister," Mom said, grabbing her purse. "We'll be back in a few hours." But Katie invited me to play in the park. I began, but then stopped, knowing the answer in advance. "Your brother and sister will meet you here, Carolyn. You can play with your friends another time." But there was no other time. Every time I hoped that I could do something for myself, something that I wanted, I got another request to feed Emma and Ethan, make sure they didn't get hurt, clean up after them, play with them, cheer them up when they were naughty. I loved them, I really loved them, but I couldn't help but notice how much everything had changed for me. My 11th birthday was a harsh reminder to me of how my family's priorities had changed. Mom bought a small cake at the grocery store, Dad gave me a used video game he found on sale, and my only friend who was allowed to come made me a bracelet with her own hands. We ate cake and played a board game, but as soon as I wanted to spend a little more time with her, my mom looked at the clock and announced that it was late. A month later, the twins turned 4 years old. And everything was different. There were balloons and face coloring in the house, a huge cake with their names written in icing. 15 children from their kindergarten ran around the yard, squealing with delight when the animator entertained them with magic tricks. They received so many gifts that they could hardly count them: new toys, clothes, books, games. And after everyone left, I was left alone in the midst of this chaos. I was removing wrapping paper, leftovers, blowing away balloons, collecting scattered pieces of confetti. Meanwhile, Emma and Ethan were sitting on the floor, surrounded by their new toys, engrossed in the game, and I, feeling tired, continued to pick up the scattered boxes and sweep the crumbs off the table. Then, looking at them, for the first time I caught myself thinking, who congratulated me that day? Who told me I was great? That this holiday would not have been a success without me? The silence, in which no one uttered these words, filled the room thicker than the air, saturated with the smell of icing sugar and paper garlands. By the age of 13, I was actually running the household, and no one seemed to have even a shadow of doubt that it was my responsibility, that I was the one who had to wake up first every morning, wake the twins, patiently listening to their complaints about the cold air outside, help them get dressed, reminding them what it was like today, the day of the week, and, accordingly, what kind of clothes they need, prepare breakfast for them, making sure that they do not eat too slowly, but also do not choke in a hurry, pack their lunches in backpacks, checking if they have forgotten their textbooks, and then escort them to school. I hurriedly put on a jacket over my home clothes so that I could immediately turn around and run to my own, hoping that I would not be late and the teacher would not give me his displeased look again. After school, I picked them up, helped them with their homework, patiently explaining grammar rules that they couldn't remember, cooked dinner, trying not to miss the moment when the soup started to boil, cleaned the house, washed, ironed, swept, washed the dishes, and then sat down to my own lessons, blinking with fatigue, and telling myself not to fall asleep right at my notebook, because in the morning it will all happen again. Mom and Dad worked full-time, came home tired, had dinner, watched TV, took a half-hearted interest in the twins' progress, sometimes said thank you to me for a clean shirt or a timely dinner, but they didn't even seem to think about the fact that I myself was also a child, which, despite my responsibility and hard work, I also sometimes wanted someone to help me, to take care of me. By the age of 16, things had gotten even worse. "Carolyn, we need to talk," Dad said in the voice he and Mom used when they were about to share something important. I walked into the kitchen expecting to hear something serious, but I wasn't ready for what it was. "We're having financial difficulties." Mom looked at me as if she expected me to instantly understand the depth of the problem. "We need you to get a job after school and help your family." I blinked, looking from her to Dad in confusion, and suddenly I felt panic rising inside me. But what about my studies? What about Emma and Ethan? I'll still have to. Of course, Mom waved her hand dismissively, as if I'd asked some kind of nonsense. Just try to find a job with a flexible schedule. The next day, I applied at a cafe 2 blocks from home. The owner, an elderly, good-natured man named Sherry, took me in immediately when I said I could work every day after school. That's how my long, exhausting shifts began. First, I washed the dishes, then cleared the tables, and soon I started taking orders, trying to smile at the customers, even when everything inside was aching from fatigue. Each salary went to the parents. Every cent. When I dared to ask if I could keep at least a small amount for myself, my mother looked at me as if I had suggested setting the house on fire. "We feed you and give you a roof over your head," she snapped. "The family needs this money." After a few weeks of gathering the courage, I tried to have this conversation again. "I work almost 30 hours a week, Mom. I need at least a little pocket money." She looked at me angrily, but after a pause she sighed and reluctantly handed me $100. "Just don't think that you can squander money," she warned. I nodded silently, realizing that it was useless to argue. I was still expected to take care of the house, cook, take care of the twins, and monitor their studies. No one was interested in my schedule except myself. One evening, when I returned from a particularly hard shift, I could barely drag my feet, dreaming only of eating and collapsing into bed. But when I opened the door, I saw Mom, Dad, and the twins sitting at the dining table, their faces tense and angry. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. "We're hungry," Mom looked at me reproachfully. "You didn't cook dinner." I froze in disbelief. "I was at school, and then I worked all day," I said, trying to comprehend the absurdity of what was happening. "That's not an excuse," Dad interjected. "You know that dinner is your responsibility." Something inside me suddenly snapped. "Are you serious?" I raised my head, feeling my throat tighten with rage and resentment. "I'm at school all day, then I work on my feet for 6 hours, and you're adults, the twins are already 9 years old, none of you could figure out how to make at least a sandwich?" There was a dull, tense silence in the room. I looked at them, and they looked at me as if they had seen me for the first time. Then Mom got up from the table, her face tensed, her lips pressed into a thin, almost bloodless line, and irritation flashed in her eyes, which I had long since learned to recognize, even before it turned into words that invariably hit me like a cold, merciless wind. "Don't you dare talk to us like that," she said, enunciating each word with icy clarity. "This is our home, and you will show respect. Go to your room. There's no dinner for you tonight." I watched in silence as Dad picked up the phone without further ado and ordered 2 large pizzas, for himself, for Mom, for the twins. Not for me. It wasn't even discussed. I didn't say anything. I just went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, washed the dishes after everyone had eaten and left the pizza boxes on the table, and then went to my room, feeling my empty stomach rumble. My graduation was supposed to be a milestone, an important event, something that would mark the end of one stage of life and the beginning of another, and most of my classmates had it that way. Their parents threw parties, bought them expensive gifts, chose colleges with them, and made plans for the future. I paid for my prom dress myself, barely saving money from the pitiful amount that I managed to get from my mother from my salary. On graduation day, my parents showed up at the last moment, just a few minutes before the ceremony began, took their seats in the back row, politely applauded when I took the stage for my diploma, and sat in silence until the end of the speeches, clearly not feeling the slightest enthusiasm for what was happening. When it was over, and I walked up to them, holding my diploma in my hands, Mom looked at her watch and said without the slightest emotion in her voice, "We have to go. Ethan has a football game in an hour." And they left. I was standing among the jubilant classmates, in my blue graduation dress, with my diploma in my hands, all alone. That evening, while my classmates were out partying and celebrating, I went out for my shift at the cafe. Carolyn, Jerry, the owner of the place, said in surprise when he saw me, "Today is your graduation. What are you doing here?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I need the money." He looked at me carefully, as if assessing something invisible behind my back, and then went back to wiping the counter. "You know, you're one of my best employees. Always on time, never complaining. But you can't build a career in a small cafe like this." I looked up, not knowing what to say. "I have a cousin, Marco," he continued. "He owns a restaurant in the city center, a really good place. He is always looking for smart workers. I could put in a good word for you if you want. The pay is much better there." 2 weeks later, I got a job at Marco's restaurant. It was harder to work there, the shifts were longer, the customers were more demanding, but the tips were significantly higher, and the salary was significantly higher than in Jerry's cafe. When my parents saw my first earnings, their delight knew no bounds. They eagerly counted every bill, discussing what they could spend them on, of course, without asking my opinion, without even mentioning the possibility of leaving me at least something. My daily routine has changed, but my parents' expectations have remained the same. I worked all day, came home, cooked, cleaned, went to bed, and the next day everything happened all over again. Meanwhile, Emma and Ethan were lounging on the couch, engrossed in video games, with absolutely no thought of doing anything to help. One evening, after a 10-hour shift, I returned home to find that a mountain of dirty dishes had accumulated in the sink, and the laundry was lying on the floor, as if someone had just thrown it there without even bothering to put it in the laundry. "Ethan! Emma!" I shouted when I saw them sitting in front of the TV, engrossed in the game. "Guys, help me get out." Ethan didn't even turn around. "That's your job," he muttered, pressing buttons on the controller. I clenched my fists. "I'm not your maid," I said. "You're already 12, you can help around the house." Emma rolled her eyes. "Mom says we don't have to do this." That evening, I went to my parents, realizing that the conversation would most likely end the same way as all previous attempts to explain to them that it was hard for me. "They're already 12, I began as soon as I entered the living room, where they were sitting. Mom was flipping through a magazine, Dad was watching the news. They should at least somehow participate in housework. "They're too young to worry about that," Mom said, not even looking up from the pages. I stood up, crossing my arms over my chest. "I helped around the house when I was 7. Dad frowned, looking at me with mild annoyance, as if he didn't like the direction of the conversation. "That was different," he said. "You were more mature." I felt something inside me shrink. Instead of talking, I wanted to scream. I just left, wondering how long I could live like this, how long I could take on the whole family, work tirelessly, give everything I earn, and not receive even a simple thank you in return. 3 years have passed, 3 long, exhausting years in the same ruthless rhythm that seemed to have been set for me since childhood. I worked at Marco's restaurant, arriving on shift without delay, performing all duties with the utmost precision, earning good money, which immediately went to my parents, with the exception of small amounts that I kept for myself for the most necessary clothes when the old ones fell into disrepair, and for a new phone when my old one was covered with cracks. Finally stopped turning on. I was good at my job. Very good. My clients loved me, my colleagues respected me, and even Marco himself, a strict and demanding man, couldn't help but notice my efforts. One day, on a particularly quiet evening, when the restaurant was already starting to empty after dinner, he called me into his office. I tensed up, fearing that I might have done something wrong, that maybe some customer was unhappy or I made a mistake that cost the institution its reputation. But when I entered, he smiled and motioned for me to sit down. "Carolyn," he said, leaning back in his chair, "how long do you plan on working as a waitress?" His question caught me off guard. I do not know, I said honestly. I've never really thought about it. Marco nodded, watching me closely. "I've been watching you for a long time," he said. "You've memorized the entire menu, you know which wines go with which dishes, and I've also seen you looking at the kitchen, watching the chef at work." I felt my face flush. "I'm just wondering how he does it," I muttered, feeling awkward, as if I'd been caught doing something forbidden. "That's what I was thinking," he smiled a little. "Listen, I have a suggestion for you. I'm willing to pay for cooking classes for you. You could study to be a cook and work in my kitchen. The payment is higher, the hours are more regular. What do you say?" I couldn't believe my ears. No one has ever invested in me. No one offered me a way forward, didn't see potential in me, didn't think I was worthy of anything more than just being a free babysitter and housekeeper for my family. That night, I literally floated home. For the first time in my life, I had something that belonged only to me, a perspective, a real goal that I could strive for, a future that I could see and touch. I couldn't wait to tell my parents about it. During dinner, which, as always, I cooked, I shared the news. "Marco offered to pay for cooking classes," I said, unable to contain my excitement. I could become a chef in his restaurant. I was expecting congratulations. At least a smile. At least a nod of approval. But all I got was a frown from my mother. "What about your duties at home?" "What is it?" she asked. "Who will cook and clean while you attend these courses?" My enthusiasm deflated like a punctured balloon. "I'm going to help anyway," I tried to explain. "The courses are only a few nights a week." "We're relying on you, Carolyn," my father said with emphasis, as if I needed to be reminded that the house would fall apart without me. I looked at Emma and Ethan. They were 15 now, and they could help, but no one had ever asked them to. Something inside me suddenly hardened, as if a thin layer of glass had turned into a solid armor. "I'm going to take these courses," I said firmly. "It's important to me." The parents exchanged glances, but they didn't argue anymore. They saw that I wouldn't back down. The cooking classes were intense and required full commitment, but each lesson filled me with joy and excitement. For the first time in my life, I was doing something exclusively for myself. I learned how to work with a knife, mastered the technique of slicing, learned how to cook sauces, find a balance of flavors, and select spices. I was doing well. I also made a friend at work. Zoe had been working as a waitress in a restaurant since about the same time as me, but unlike me, she wasn't quiet and submissive. She was straightforward, funny, and didn't take shit from anyone. "So you live with your parents?" Zoe asked one day during our short break, when we were sitting in the backyard of the restaurant, hiding from the scorching sun behind a shabby brick wall, rolling cigarettes from cheap tobacco, which she always carried with her in a crumpled pack. "Yes, With my younger brother and sister, I shrugged, trying to sound casual, as if there was nothing special about it. And you pay the rent? I shivered uncomfortably, feeling how her question made something inside shrink, as if with one phrase she turned me around to face something that I myself preferred not to notice. Not really, I muttered, looking away. I just give them most of my salary. Zoe's eyebrows shot up, her eyes narrowed, and I noticed her slowly shake her head, as if hearing something completely absurd. How much? I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant, but the words came out of my mouth. Almost everything. I leave only a little for basic necessities, clothes when the old ones wear out, a phone. And you cook for them, clean, take care of the house, work full-time and go to courses? Her voice sounded slow, as if she couldn't believe she was saying those words out loud. When she put it that way, my life suddenly seemed like the most ridiculous thing in the world. I tried to explain how it all turned out, how since childhood I was always expected to help, how my parents worked from morning to night, how Emma and Ethan were different, gentle, in need of care. I said that the family should always support each other, that I was just lucky to be more responsible than them, that it had always been like this, and I got used to it. Zoe listened in silence with her arms crossed over her chest, but as I spoke, her face became more and more incredulous, and indignation flashed in her eyes, which she did not even try to hide. Carolyn, she finally said when I finished. This is not normal. It's not a concern. It's not love. This is exploitation. I jerked as if she'd hit me. They're my family, I muttered weakly. What's the difference? She leaned forward sharply, her eyes flashing. A family should support each other, and not use one person as a personal servant and ATM. I laughed to lighten the atmosphere, to somehow dismiss her words, but they stuck in my head like tiny splinters that couldn't be pulled out. Was I really being used? What I thought was my duty was actually an injustice. The answer was not long in coming. The twins' 16th birthday came with the pomp that I had expected, with the brilliance and attention that I myself had never had. Mom ordered a signature cake, shaped like a game controller for Ethan and decorated with pink frosted roses for Emma. Dad hung streamers and balloons all over the house, ordered catering with pizza, burritos, drinks, and snacks. 20 of the twins' friends were running around the house laughing and screaming, and I was assigned to work that day, not by chance, as I realized a long time ago. Over the years, I've learned to voluntarily sign up for shifts on family holidays. It was easier to be absent than to be present. It was easier to escape than to stand aside and be invisible. It was an exhausting shift, one of those when the restaurant is full to capacity, customers are moody, and the kitchen is hot and dizzy. I haven't had time to eat even once all day. When I got home, the party was already over. The music was still playing in the living room. Several of the twins' friends were hanging around the rooms, pizza boxes were scattered on the tables, and the floor was littered with confetti and crumpled napkins, as if a tornado had passed through the house. I slipped into the kitchen, trying not to attract attention, filled my plate with leftover pizza, found a corner by the table, and was finally about to take the first bite when my mom appeared in the doorway. "Oh, it's good that you're home," she said so casually, as if I hadn't been away all day, as if my presence didn't matter in the slightest. I froze with a slice of pizza in my hands, feeling something inside me shrink again. The kids made a mess in the living room. "You can start cleaning up." I stared at her, feeling my empty stomach tighten even more. "Mom, I haven't eaten all day. I just want to eat something first." She frowned, as if I'd said something unheard of, something brazen, something outrageous. "The guests are about to leave." Her voice hardened. "I need you to get out." Her tone left no room for argument. I felt something inside me slowly but inexorably change. It was as if the thin thread that had kept me tied to this house for years had stretched to its limit and was about to snap. "I'm hungry," I said slowly, clearly. "I'm going to eat first." Mom's eyes narrowed. Carolyn. Now. I reached for the plate, but before my fingers could touch it, Mom abruptly snatched it out from under my hand. Now, Carolyn, she repeated coldly. The dishes can wait until you clean up. I stared at her, feeling rage building up inside me, a hot, suffocating wave that rose from my stomach itself, from that empty, rumbling, forgotten stomach that no one had ever cared about. For years, I have fulfilled their requests. I've been sacrificing my desires for years. For years, I've been forcing myself to believe that this is normal, that this is how it should be. But now I couldn't take it anymore. I was hungry, not only in body, but also in mind. I'm hungry for a life that belongs only to me. It was the moment when something inside me broke, something that had patiently withstood the load for many years until it turned into a fragile shell ready for destruction. I slowly got up from my chair, straightened my back, peering into my mother's face, as if for the first time I really saw her, as if through years of fog and blind submission I finally managed to see her for who she really was. I've been working all day, I said flatly, even though I was seething with rage. And I'm going to eat first. Mom narrowed her eyes, her fingers curled on the plate, as if she was seriously going to not give it to me, but before she could say a word, Dad came into the kitchen, followed by Emma and Ethan with animated faces. Look what we have! Ethan exclaimed excitedly, holding up a brand new smartphone of the latest model, which had just gone on sale and cost at least $1,000. And we both have laptops. Emma added, beaming as if she'd just been announced winning the lottery, pulling out a brand new MacBook from behind her back. I looked from their expensive gifts to my empty stomach, to the plate of food that Mom still hadn't given me, to the mess I was supposed to clean up, and something just clicked inside me, like a blown fuse. Congratulations, I said, and my voice was louder than I expected. Emma and Ethan looked at me with slight confusion, as if I had just spoken in an unfamiliar language. When are you two going to start working after school? There was a dead silence in the room. The twins stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. What? Ethan muttered, frowning. Work, I repeated, with emphasis. Well, you know how I've been doing it since I was 16. I turned to my parents, waiting for them to finally say something reasonable, to admit that Emma and Ethan were old enough not only to receive expensive gifts, but also to begin contributing to the family. But instead, my father smiled, a strange, condescending smile that made my stomach turn cold. Carolyn, he said in the tone one usually uses to speak to a moody child, your brother and sister have a bright future ahead of them. They need to focus on their studies, not their work. I blinked, feeling something in my chest start to snap apart. Didn't I have a bright future? I asked hoarsely, almost in a whisper, because it would have been unbearable to speak louder at that moment. Mom put her arm around Emma's shoulders and stroked her hand, as if she wanted to emphasize all her fragility, all her specialness. They deserve better, she said. And your duty is to work and help your family. And then everything fell into place. My brother and sister deserved better. I've earned my debt. Got it, I said softly. Mom nodded, satisfied. Good. Now please start cleaning up. The living room is a disaster. I turned around and went to the sink. I turned on the water. She picked up a sponge. I was washing dishes while behind my back my family was opening boxes, sorting presents, discussing the upcoming vacation, which, as always, did not include me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Zoe had said. About everything I've been through. About everything that I finally understood with frightening clarity. Nothing will change. Unless I change it. By morning, my decision had been made. I waited until everyone was gone. Mom and Dad went to work, Emma and Ethan went to school, leaving behind their usual mess without even thinking about who would clean it up. I packed my things into 2 small suitcases and a backpack. It didn't take long. After 23 years in this house, I found myself with shockingly few things that really belonged to me. I dialed Zoe's number, praying she'd answer. "Hey, how are you?" Her voice was light, carefree, as always. "Do you remember when you said that I should leave my parents' house?" My voice was shaking, but I couldn't stop it. There was a short pause on the line. "Yes," she said seriously. "I'm doing it today. Right now. But I need to stop somewhere." "Damn it, of course." "What is it?" she exclaimed. "I have a spare bedroom. You can stay as long as you need to." I exhaled, feeling something slide off my shoulders. I hung up the phone and took one last look around my room. No notes. What for? They'll figure it out when they get home. Into a dirty house. No dinner. The taxi driver helped me load the bags into the trunk. I got into the back seat and the car started moving, taking me further and further away from the house where I have lived all my life. I expected to feel something: sadness, regret, nostalgia. But all I felt was relief. Zoe was already waiting for me. When the taxi pulled up to Zoya's house, she ran out to meet me, without waiting for me to get out of the car, quickly grabbed one of my bags and, without saying a word, hugged me tightly, as if this was not just a move, but an escape from a besieged fortress, long awaited, brave, the only right one. As soon as we brought our things inside, she turned to me with a big smile. Approval shone in her eyes, and I felt the icy lump in my chest melt a little. "I'm so proud of you," she said, squeezing my hands in hers. "This is a huge step." Her apartment was small but cozy, full of life, colors, and some strange but surprisingly cute details that spoke more about her than any words. Colorful bedspreads carelessly draped over an armchair, posters from concerts she once attended, stacks of books on the windowsill, photographs on the walls. Where she was laughing with friends, clutching huge paper cups of coffee. The spare room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a small chest of drawers, but it was more than enough. "I'll pay the rent," I said, opening my suitcase and starting to sort out my clothes. "Half or whatever is fair." Zoe nodded, not giving it much thought. "We'll figure it out. Do not rush." We went to work together that day, and when I stepped outside her house, for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter, as if a heavy coat that I had been wearing for years had been lifted off my shoulders, not noticing how worn out it was and soaked through with other people's expectations. Marco noticed the change immediately. "You look different today," he said when I entered the restaurant. I smiled. "I moved out of my parents' house." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. "Well done. Are you ready for your shift?" I nodded and we started working, but by the time we finished in the evening, my phone was ringing with missed calls. 20 challenges. I showed Zoe the screen, not knowing whether to laugh or be afraid. "Are you going to answer that?" "What is it?" she asked. "Not yet." We stopped at a liquor store on the way home, bought a bottle of cheap red wine, and when we returned to the apartment, we sat on its tiny balcony, climbed with our feet on an old wicker sofa, drank wine from different mugs and toasted to my freedom. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang again. My mother's name appeared on the screen. "I have to take this," I said, staring at the phone like it was a snake about to bite. "Just to get it over with." Zoe nodded encouragingly. I took a deep breath and pressed accept. "Where the hell are you?" Her mother's voice pierced the silence, filled with panic and anger. "The house is a mess. There's no dinner. We've been calling you for hours." "I moved out," I said calmly. There was a pause, tense, suffocating. "What do you mean, moved out?" "What is it?" she said, as if she couldn't believe she'd heard correctly. "I packed my things and left," I repeated. "I'm not coming back." Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, her voice hard and icy. You can't just leave. Who's going to cook? Who's going to clean up? Who is? Maybe you can do it yourself, I interrupted. Or maybe Emma and Ethan could help, because they are already at the age when I started working. Carolyn, her tone changed abruptly, became soft, almost coaxing. Come home, we need to talk about this. Properly. No, I said. And she hung up the phone. The calls and messages continued for hours. I turned off my phone. How are you feeling? Zoe asked as we finished our wine. I thought about it, turning over in my head everything that had happened that day, digesting every word, every gesture, every decision. Free, I said. Scared. Guilty. It's a great set, she clinked her mug against mine. The next day, when my shift ended, my parents were waiting for me outside the restaurant. I was expecting this. Zoe offered to stay, but I asked her to go ahead. It was a conversation that I needed to finish on my own. As soon as they saw me, they moved forward. Mom looked like she was crying. The father looked like he was ready to scream. Carolyn, we need to talk, Dad said, stepping forward and trying to take my hand, but I reflexively stepped back, and his fingers just hung limply in the air. About what? My voice sounded steady, but everything inside was boiling. Mom pressed her lips together, her face wrinkled, as if she was struggling to find the words that, in her opinion, should convince me. We've thought it over, honey, she said softly, almost affectionately, but I've already learned to recognize the falseness in her voice. We understand that we put too much pressure on you, forced you to do too much work. She sighed, folded her arms over her chest, and then reached out to me, as if trying to close the distance between us. We want you to come home. I narrowed my eyes, assessing them, really looking at them for the first time, at the tense expression on my father's face, at the pleading look on my mother's face, at the anxiety in their eyes, but the anxiety about what? That I'm gone? Or that my salary went with me? Tell me, I deliberately spoke slowly, giving them a chance to think. Are you more upset that I left, or that you no longer bring my money home? My mother's face twitched, just for a second, a subtle change, but it was enough for me. That's not fair, Carolyn, she breathed, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe I could say such a thing. We're your family. We're counting on your salary. She didn't even try to hide it. It was true, wasn't it? I said with a bitter smile. They didn't deny it. I'm not coming back, I said firmly, and turned to leave. You're a selfish girl. Mom shouted after me, and her voice was no longer soft and pleading. It became harsh, filled with anger and despair. After all we've done for you. I kept walking. Their words disappeared behind my back, melting into the evening air, and I felt only lightness. The year flew by unnoticed. I lived with Zoe, paid my share of the rent, and saved money, realizing for the first time in my life what it meant to have savings and not be afraid of being asked for every last cent. Working as a chef brought me a joy I didn't even know I had, creating dishes, seeing customers enjoy my food, receiving praise for my skills, rather than hearing irritated comments that I could have done better. I almost forgot about my family. Until my phone rang from an unknown number. I didn't want to answer. But she still swiped her finger across the screen. Hi, Carolyn, it's Mom. I almost hung up, but some inner stubbornness held me back. What do you want? We need to talk about the twins. I rolled my eyes, already knowing where this was going. Their college education, she continued. They'll start their studies next fall, and we need your help paying for them. I opened my mouth to ask again because it seemed to me that I had misheard, but her tone was completely serious. Are you kidding? I almost laughed. This isn't funny, Carolyn, she said sternly. The family helps the family. You have to do your part. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table with my fingers, feeling anger rising inside, but now that anger was different, not the same as before. How, for example, did you help me with college? I asked with a venomous sweetness in my voice. Silence. Oh, wait. You're not. I couldn't even go. That was different. Stop it, she screamed, and I could almost see her waving her arms indignantly. Gemini has real potential. That's it. I spent years trying to please this woman. For years, believing that I was somehow less worthy than my brother and sister. But not anymore. I'm not paying for their college, I said clearly. I won't give you another cent. Never. You're selfish, ungrateful. I've been supporting this family since I was 16. I exploded, interrupting her. I cooked, cleaned, worked, gave you almost every dollar I earned. You've never thanked me. I've never appreciated it. She never treated me like I mattered. Mom started to say something, but I wasn't listening anymore. I'm done, I said, and hung up. I blocked her number. And then I changed mine. Just in case. And that's when, finally, the whole connection between us finally ended. 2 months later, I found my own apartment. It was a tiny studio, just one room with a kitchen and a bathroom, without any frills, without much comfort, but it was mine. Zoe helped me move in, and on the first night, we celebrated the move by sitting on the floor among the boxes, ordering takeaways, and clinking cans of soda. For independence, she said, holding up her can. For choosing myself, I smiled back. Now I'm sitting in my apartment, looking at my few belongings, a small bookshelf, a used coffee table, a houseplant that was given to me for a housewarming party, and for the first time I feel truly free. Marco promoted me to assistant chef. This is the first time I've saved money for culinary school. I'm building a future based on what I want. I don't miss my family. Sometimes I think about Emma and Ethan. Did they learn how to cook and clean? Did you get a job to help pay for your studies? I don't know. But I hope that one day they will understand what took me years to do. That love should not be conditional. That your family shouldn't exploit you. That you are valuable not only for what you can do for others,